Hi, everyone. This is Janae Sargent with Prevent Connect. The podcast you're about to listen to is an excerpt from a web conference we hosted in January of 2022. It's called Building a Foundation for Sexual and Intimate Partner Violence Prevention. Additional information about the web conference can be found linked on this podcast page on our website. Today, we are going to be hearing from Tori Vandelin and Ashley Klein Jimenez in the second of a two-part series, exploring sexual and intimate partner violence prevention fundamentals.
So when we talk about what it means to be a root cause of violence, for me, what comes to mind is this symbol of a tree. And I think this is probably one of the simpler ways that I can describe what's a root cause of violence versus what's a symptom of violence to my family. So thinking back to the personal story of my path to prevention that I shared with you all, I had shared that part of that story included a young man at college orientation, really, really being adamant about his beliefs about women's clothing being the cause of sexual violence, and these are his very, very binary words. So when I see someone say that dress codes will prevent sexual violence, or if women or femme expressed, femme bodied people just dress or act differently, that will prevent violence. When I hear people say that, I see that they are identifying the leaves on the tree. They see the symptoms of violence. They think if we pluck all the leaves off the tree, that will get rid of sexual violence. However, as we know from anybody who's had to rake leaves in the fall in the front yard, those leaves will grow back. They may grow back a little bit differently. That may be maybe a symptom of violence will be a little bit different than the victim blaming and body policing that we've seen before. What would help to prevent sexual violence would be to actually get down to the root and address the cause. What is it in that tree that is causing these leaves to come out and be super visible? How can we dig deeper and identify what is feeding this tree of sexual assault that creates these leaves of victim blaming and body policing? And this is just one example of the many ways that root causes of violence influence sexual violence and its symptoms that are readily visible to the general public. But for us as preventionists, we have a really great opportunity to, when we hear people identifying the symptoms of violence as a cause of violence, we have an opportunity to pivot and really show people how deep these roots of violence go and what is needed in order to change them. And I'm going to pass it over to Ashley now to describe, what exactly are the root causes of violence? What do we mean when we say that something is a root cause of violence?
Thanks, Tori. And so this is a tool. Hold on, let me get to the next slide. This is a tool that I came across years ago that has really helped me make the connection that oppression is a root cause of sexual violence. And so this is the sexual violence continuum that Lydia Guy Ortiz created back in 2006. And in this tool, you'll notice that there's a range of sexually violating behaviors, and those are depicted in overlapping circles on the gray background. And the background is really meant to be our society. The outer ring of our society is labeled on this diagram as norms to remind us that attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors really work in tandem with one another. They really reinforce one another. And in the center is a white circle with the word oppression. And surrounding that circle are overlapping circles with 6 specific forms of oppression. And many of these forms, folks actually called out in the chat as being why the bridges in their communities are broken. And so this is really meant to highlight the ways that oppressions are linked and are often experienced at the same time. And this image helps us see that all forms of oppression are root causes of these behaviors. And I'm going to go to the next slide so you can see that the shading of the circles was, done purposefully, that the darker shaded circles are things that are typically kind of seen in society. They're validated, they're taken seriously. And the lighter circles are kind of the ones that aren't taken as seriously. They're not really seen for what they are. But what this diagram shows us is that they're all connected, right? And they all come from what you're talking about, Tori, these root causes. And so I'm going to pass it back to you so you can take us even deeper into the root causes and the tree analogy.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I think this is such a great way to explain the root causes of violence. And, I also want folks to know that these root causes of violence contribute to the norms, or the norms that contribute to violence are upheld by these root causes too. So one of the ways that we can think about that, we can go a little bit deeper, dig deeper, if you'll allow the metaphor, into what the causes of violence are, and really look at the soil. So Guante is a spoken word poet. He's done a lot of work around sexual violence specifically, but he has this poem from 2014 called "How to Explain White Supremacy to a White Supremacist." And there's a line in it that I think works really well when we think about the soil of our tree of sexual violence. The quote is, "White supremacy is not the shark, but the water we swim in." So often when we think about sexual violence, we think of it as the violent person themselves. When we think about sexual and intimate partner violence, we think of who did it, who's the perpetrator. But when we look at prevention, we have to look more at what is the soil that allowed that tree, what is the environment that allowed sexual violence and intimate partner violence to occur in the first place. So these root causes of violence thrive in the soil that they're in. So how do we change those root causes? We change our environments and norms so that those systems of oppression, those forms of oppression, are not acceptable. They can't thrive in soil that looks to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence. So we expand a little bit more on the leaves, the roots of sexual violence, and really look at what's in our environments, what's in the soil, and as preventionists, what can we change? And Ashley, I think with that, we will ask our audience another text chat question.
Yeah, Tori. So we would love to hear from you all. In your communities, what do you see as the root causes of violence? What are the pollutants that are in the soil, so to speak? And I have to, just share, there was a comment from Alberto about it's frustrating because in my community, it's beyond the bridge. It's not just the bridge, but the road that leads to the bridge and the intersections leading up to the broken road that leads to the fallen bridge. And I think that that's really what we're getting at here, is that we can, it's so important for us to go upstream to the root. And I'm seeing things come in the chat, Tori: racism, oppression, sexism, a rural silent rule of silence, poverty, housing insecurity, intergenerational transmission of poverty, violence, masculinity being linked to dominance, white supremacy, transphobia, capitalism. I mean, they're coming in fast, Tori. But this is exactly it. These are the roots. These are what's polluting the soil.
Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe to Prevent Connect podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information, head to preventconnect.org/podcasts.